Hello and welcome back to the Work Cultured Podcast. Thanks for joining us again. Today we have with us Beth Kaplan, Dr. Beth Kaplan. I don't want to leave that out. That's so important. And she is the author of Braving the Workplace, which has just been released, and you definitely need to go check it out. We'll do some more shameless plugging in a minute. But Beth, why don't you give us just a high-level intro? Who are you? I know you're actually very accomplished in your career, but we want to mostly talk about the book and about culture today and belonging. So give us that version of who is Beth.
Hi, everyone. Beth Kaplan. I am a belonging researcher and storyteller, very proud to dive into the world of social sciences. And I really focus mostly on belonging, workplace belonging, and workplace trauma. A little bit of that.
Wow. Okay. We'll dive right into trauma. How about that? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right. Maybe we'll get there, but not right away. I am, to be fair, I have to put you under the same heat lamp as everyone else and ask you the same kind of opening question.
Yes.
Beth, what is a mistake that you have made in leadership that you'll never forget?
My goodness. How much
Let
time
me count
is
the
this
waves.
podcast? Okay. One of the biggest mistakes that I used to make, I don't make it anymore, which is the good news, is that I would always be on. That was one of my fatal flaws. I would be on all the time. And then something really interesting happened where I was on vacation and they didn't have Wi-Fi. It was a million years ago, as you could tell. And what happened was fascinating. So I came back to the office and people were so excited to see me. And I was like, that's really nice. And then I got a couple comments of, it's amazing how much you trust us. I had no idea what they were talking about, that you trusted us. And they're like, you went on vacation and you completely disconnected. You weren't worried. You didn't check in. The world didn't end. And that felt so nice to feel so trusted by you. And the reality is, and I never told them, although if they're listening, now you know, it's because I didn't have Wi-Fi. And it taught me such an amazing lesson that I was making this mistake of always being on. And people took it like I didn't trust them, which was certainly not the case, but that's perception and that's reality, right? So that would probably be what sprung to mind first of one of the lessons.
That's a great lesson for a lot of us,
mistake,
right? Like there's so much there. We always feel like we have to be on, we have to be available. And we think that the mindset is we're serving the organization, we're serving our people, whatever else. But there are other impacts that don't match our intentions, and we have to become aware of those things and realize what those negative impacts are.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about boundaries. You know, the reality is that team took it as trust. I never would have thought about that. I would have probably set the boundary thinking that my actions would control them, which is such a mistake. Your boundaries are set up to protect you.
Yeah,
not the
absolutely.
So that was probably
that's a whole nother teaching moment, by the way, about boundaries. We could dive into what's the difference between a boundary and a control. And maybe we can come back to it. But I do want to dive into your specialty, right? You said you're a researcher on belonging. Generally speaking, and I assume this is true with you, when people write a book, when they dive into research about something, there's a story behind it. So for you, what's either like a big moment or a kind of a monumental story that moved you and motivated you to dive into this work?
I think belonging has always been a calling for me. I always like to say that many of us are belonging experts. I've just been certified as one. And so for me, it really did stem from a really bad workplace set of interactions I had with the manager. And that's not going to surprise many people out there because manager is the biggest influence on our sense of belonging in the workplace. Jason, do you remember there was a phrase maybe 10, 15 years ago that went a little like, people don't leave their companies, they leave their managers? Did you know there was no research associated with it?
Instinct. Yeah, that's fascinating.
You did,
of course.
You believed it, right? So what's interesting is I did too. And then when I had this negative interaction with the leader, probably one of the first poor interactions I've had, which is kind of lucky if you think about it, it hit me. And it hit me in such a way that I never saw coming. I stopped sleeping at night. I started to gain weight. I have 2 beautiful boys and I stopped going to some of their functions, all in the name to be loyal to something that could never be loyal back. And it made me feel so bad, not just mentally, but physically. And when I went to really understand why all of that was happening, I mean, I really braced myself for like a windfall of Google Scholar articles. There was nothing. So to know me is to know that that never was going to sit right with me. And I so curious. And so I started to get into the world of belonging. And what came with that was a lot of jargon, a lot of DEI, a lot of the new inclusion, belonging. And, I think for me, it became a quest And I realized it's probably been a calling my whole life. I've always been looking for those belonging moments. I've always created communities. I mean, it won't be surprising to you. I ran onboarding several times in my career. So for me, it's a calling, and I just feel very lucky that I happen to realize this passion. Hopefully, can really reset the way we think about belonging and how we are truer to
That's awesome.
ourselves.
I want to dive into this a little bit. Are you familiar with the author Patrick Lencioni? Okay, so he's written many books. One of them is something like the 3 signs of a miserable job or something. And there's one sign is immeasurement, which is a made up word, but it just means people can't self-evaluate how they're doing. The other two are interesting. The anonymity, right? Like I'm not known. I don't, and then the other is irrelevance, like the lack of being attached to something meaningful and a purpose. And when I first heard that, and I actually got to hear him speak at a world leadership conference, global leadership conference, something like that, summit, whatever it was called. And he used the word belonging in a way that it was the first time I heard it tied to something that didn't sound like jargon. Both the anonymity piece and the irrelevance piece really spoke to belonging to group, community, also belonging to purpose and something that matters. Now that's as deep as I go. Everything else is rudimentary. So please educate me. That's my primer based on the little I know, but expand on that for me. What is belonging to you?
Sure. Belonging, in the way I look at it, is the innate desire to be part of something larger than ourselves without sacrificing who we are. So I look at the way we construct our sense of belonging. So you are different than I am. You and I could hear the same sentence and spin off at least 20 variations of it. So belonging is the same. And throughout history, it's been changed dramatically. Some people think it's membership, others call it attachment. I really study how we internalize it and how we are able to stay true to ourselves without really giving into belonging's arch nemesis, which is fitting in.
Yeah,
That's how
right.
I see it.
Fitting in is pretending to be someone so
So
that you are part of the tribe, right? Am I getting
that's
that?
right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And there's certain things that you can sacrifice for yourself, but very, very few and far between are the things you can sacrifice for yourself that feel noble in the workplace. Unless you're on the front line, or there's very specific jobs that do that for you. But we've come really into such a different stage of life and work. Just 30 years ago, not even, the way we set our sense of belonging was completely different. It wasn't the workplace like we see it now. And a lot of companies are claiming that they're the destination for belonging. And if they are, and it works, great. But what happens for those folks that don't feel it? They don't feel that imposed sense of belonging. And that's it. So you can include to the cows come home. Whether someone feels like they belong enough or not is completely up to them. And that's really an important message that we need to start looking at with companies. And the way to do it, because I'm sure that might be one of your next questions, is to start meeting employees where they're at. So you mentioned purpose. That's a great launching point. Let's go as far back as 10 years ago. You saw it everywhere, right? Purpose, purpose, purpose. Nowadays, people are going to ask, whose purpose? Whose purpose are you appealing to? Is it the company's purpose? No, employees want for you to meet them where they're at with their
Yeah, that's
purpose.
okay. So many employers right now have no idea how to hire and lead and retain Gen Zers. And I think what you
Yes,
just said might be one of those key factors involved. Like, I'm a great company. We have amazing purpose. We're changing the world one diaper at a time. I don't know what it is. Yeah. And the Gen Zer comes in like, yeah, I don't give a shit about that. Right. I don't care about your purpose. What is my role to play in this? How do I have my purpose fulfilled? Is that kind of what you're saying there?
that's exactly what I'm saying. Going back to your comments about Patrick, there's something also to note is that belonging to the anonymity, feeling valued, sense of mattering, they're all really key to the
Sure.
human
Yes,
condition.
beyond work.
So it's no surprise that when I was struggling at work, I struggled everywhere in life. So belonging, unfortunately, is an antecedent to
Mm,
suicide for all the things that you just mentioned. So when people don't feel that way, that's where they start to feel incredible repercussions. So I feel a thwarted sense of belonging. That would round out the
yeah.
third of the things that you had mentioned that really resonate with you. So you might be your own belonging researcher in the making, Jason. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is really amazing how much we influence work and how much work
Yeah.
influences us. And that's why Gen Z is I always like to call
Oh,
them the
wow.
purpose
Okay,
generation.
cool. Yeah, we are very much vibing on the same wavelengths here, unknowingly. Okay.
Yeah.
I do have a question. So when I think about belonging, and I know this is not like a super accurate way to think about it, but I always think about just like interaction and connection and just people, right? And then I think about people's hard wiring, and you've got the very high sociability folks who crave and need that affirmation and that connection and all that. And then you have the people that are like, yeah, if I could work out of a broom closet by myself all day, every day, I'd be super happy. Right. So the folks that when COVID quarantine happened, they're like, yay. Like what, how does belonging, or at least the understanding of it, differ between we'll just use common language, a highly introverted versus a highly extroverted person?
I love that question so much. That's the next book. In all honesty, personality is a huge, huge factor. And I could break down the 8 levels of you and all that stuff. But the reality is it all comes into play when we think about how much stimulus we need in life. I am ambivert to extrovert. My husband is ambivert to introvert. So he's one of those people that craves people in spurts, but when he goes out, he's drained from it. Where me, I can go out and then stay out for a really long time. So it really is about how much you can take and are willing to take and want to take. So gone are the days where we used to cater to these like big company parties and big celebrations from a capacity and budget perspective, but it's probably did a real good service to all the amazing introverts that are out there because it wasn't helping them. And then what they were doing is they were compensating by covering and all these different things. And for me, I started to really wonder why and if it was positive. And I'm going to tell you, I came up with the fact that it is positive. Here's the thing. There are multiple types of belonging. So that's something also that's come in my research, that's in the book. One of them is called dissimulated. And so dissimulated, if you think about it, people that do have a sense of belonging, but they don't get it from the same way that you and I might in the workplace. Some people really just vibe off of the work they're in, their work friends, their work culture. And some people just don't. For example, I may go between the hours of 9 to 5 and I might be your most dedicated employee. But the second I leave, I'm all about my family. And that's okay. They're always going to come first. That's not the same for everyone. And it's not something to be shamed for or to carry a stigma, with the exception of what you asked, which was the introverts, who definitely get so much slack in the workplace. The reality is they're no less dedicated. They're highly productive, sometimes way more productive. That's the truth. But they carry the stigma for not necessarily wanting to be our corporate cheerleaders. So different people, no matter what personality you are, require different levels of belonging for themselves in their relation to others, whether it's the company, the team, the manager, or anything inside of life, right? That's not just limited to our work, but there are many types. And I think that's a really important distinction is that you could be dissimulated, you could be a sacrificial belonging, a true, or what Patrick was referring to, which is thwarted.
Okay. So say
thwarted belonging, which is a lack
the
of belonging.
3 types again of belonging. You said there are 3? 4?
Sure. It's 4. There's true belonging. Okay. So true is everything is happy and you're thriving and you feel like you're part of something and don't have to sacrifice yourself whatsoever. There's sacrificial belonging, and that's where you're consciously or subconsciously sacrificing parts or all of yourself for the greater good of something.
Okay. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right?
There's
this is not a sacrifice that's like a detriment or... Okay.
If it's noble. Yeah, if it's a noble piece. But if you're giving up too much of yourself in any way, shape, or form, it's not going to feel good.
True.
We know that.
Okay, so true.
That slides into fitting in.
So true.
Yeah.
Sacrificial.
Yeah. Thwarted, which is a lack of belonging, and then dissimulated, which we talked about. And I often get the question is dissimulated negative? And no. Dissimulated belongers are super happy people usually, meaning they're comfortable with themselves. It's the rest of us that usually have an issue with them.
You might look
Sometimes
at them and judge and say, how could you feel like you belong? Because you just don't. You relate in a different way, carry a different energy. Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
Let's get practical. Let's talk about culture. Mm-hmm. Most of our audience are CEOs, heads of HR, and they come here to kind of hear a couple things. One, that they're not alone in making mistakes all the time in leadership. You're still not. Y'all are good. But the other is like the practical tips, right? So taking this idea of 4 types of belonging, understanding that without belonging, people, I mean, it leads to even higher rates of suicide. I mean, it's a serious, serious problem. So of course, it's also going to lead to things like disengagement and potential turnover, lost productivity, all of the big ROI, P&L type terms that we want to talk about, the dollars and the cents, right? So get practical. Like, what are some of the biggest tips that you give for us to be looking out for these opportunities and to be understanding of how to build a culture of belonging for our people?
The number one thing I tell CEOs is to take a leaders first approach. A lot of the times in the workplace, we miss the leaders, or leadership efforts or development become a luxury. And here's the thing, when you train the leader or you develop the leader, you're essentially developing the whole team. That's the first thing I always say to them.
Yeah.
Having, we also talked about earlier the fact that the leader is the number one influence on our sense of belonging in the workplace. Just don't realize how much power they have over people. And more these days, they're worried about bottom line numbers. They should be, by the way. I'm not saying they shouldn't be. But there are so many things that impact that P&L, to your point around turnover. I mean, when you hire someone and they leave within the first year, it's something up to 3 times
3 to 5
their
it can be,
salary
yeah,
that you lose at the company.
even higher for executive roles.
Yes. 3 to 5. I would say that the first thing you do is you want to invest in your leaders, which is such a miss in most companies. I heard it all before. Our leaders are so great. We don't need this. Yes, they do. Because the other thing is they need to understand their own sense of belonging. The phrases I told you are new. Since my research came out, people then are building on it, which makes me so happy. I love the fact that people are going to probably come up with 5 more types. That's amazing. The other thing is to realize that people experience partial belonging. And I'm going to explain it in the easiest way I can. I belong to a gym. I belong to the library. Don't belong to the librarian, belong to the library. I can take out books. I may feel more connected to the library than the gym. So you can have multiple types of belonging. You can have partial connection to some, you can have full connection to others, and you can have a lack of in between. Getting them to understand and see their employees as full units is incredibly, incredibly important. Here's the thing, people want to be known. They want to feel like they matter. They want to know, Jason, that when I'm like out of this Zoom box, that you care about me. So a lot of the times companies have been really invested in DEI. Another tip I would give people is to start deconstructing a little bit, because diversity in its own right is incredibly important. It really needs to be valued for what it is: diversity of thought, diversity of representation. So I would separate those things out and start to measure what that looks like. The number one thing I would start placing in is care. And I'm not saying care as in thoughtfulness necessarily. I'm saying that leaders should start to embrace and understand that spectrum of care. Care can be not only, I'm thinking about you, I know who you are, I know what your children's names are, right? I know you like to go horseback riding after work. But it also can be care to speak my name in a room I'm not in for opportunity. It could be care in the form of clear. Clear as kind. That's caring. So I would say to CEOs out there to really investigate in what care looks like in your company and start with the leaders, because that's really going to be where you need to start detangling a little bit. And then you're going to see a huge return when they start to get it. Here's the other thing. We place a lot on these leaders, and most leaders are not psychologists, right? But they're being asked to take on so much in the form of care that they don't understand. So I would really reset that definition, and I'd start to dive in a little bit more.
Meg Pogue was a previous author and podcast guest, and she talks a lot about trust. And there are the 3 components of trust, and one of them is care. And the unfortunate and irrational part of trust is that you don't know what those people's expectations are. So if you're going to care for them, like you said, that might be knowing what they like to do on the weekends and their kids' names and all that. But there are other people that are like, they would interpret that as invasive as hell. Whoa, stop asking me personal questions, right? So you have to care for people in unique ways. You have to know who they are at their core. And you're right, that's not easy. We're talking about...
No, you have to meet them where they're at, because this is, to your point, some people don't want you to know who they are.
And that's fair.
So you have to be respectful. That is fair. So it's that trust. And here's the other thing, something you said really, some people don't know how their employees are. Here's the best part. It's never too late to learn. One of the best practices I give leaders, especially new leaders or leaders that are transitioning, ask their people. Say, what did you like about the last 3 managers that you were with, and what didn't you like? Learn from them. And here's something also really, really important. Have them learn about you. A lot of the times I say, give them your boundaries up front and make sure that they know that boundaries are what you use to control yourself, not necessarily what you're imposing on them, but things that you need to keep yourself right.
Yeah. I think that I really hope if people are listening that a big point being driven home is to start with your leaders. You know, we've talked about some of those popular phrases, those catchphrases. Another one that's been around for who knows how long is it's lonely at the top. And it is.
Yes.
And there's like this assumption that we're supposed to just like grit it out, you know, like I have a C-level title and I have a paycheck that must mean that I just kind of have to swallow it and deal with it, you know, but that's a really unhealthy and toxic way to exist. I remember when I first brought some of the Brene Brown Dare to Lead material to my executive team at Champion. There was 10 or 11 of us all in a room. We would do these quarterly retreats, get away, like a big Airbnb. And we were talking about emotions, empathy, and things like that. And this was a very kind of like blue collar industry. I was trying to not be too touchy feely, but one guy like sat in the back and he was like, this is just bullshit. I cannot believe we're here to talk about emotions. And his face is turning red as he's saying, I don't feel emotions at work. And like all 9 of the other people who were skeptical look at the guy and they're like, yeah, we need this, don't we? And it was like his internalized belief was that I'm in this position that I don't even experience emotion, much less do I need to deal with it. Probably because he didn't feel like he was allowed to. But the only people who don't feel emotion are psychopaths. And I don't think I employed any of those.
You know, I think we're taught really early to keep emotions out of the workplace. And I think, if I had to guess, the last few years kind of broke that party up, but good. Because the thing is, that's for a long time after and around COVID, that's all we talked about. So you've got this really hard mix where we don't necessarily want to lose what makes us human. And no, you don't want to spend all your days talking about it. But I think it is harder at the top in that sense with loneliness because most of our leaders have been taught that they should not talk about that. I mean, as a female leader growing up, oh my goodness, you don't show emotion, you don't cry, you don't show sensitivity. All the shoulds, the woulds, the coulds. I have a really nice salute to that. It's not nice, and I wouldn't put it on your podcast because the reality is you need to do what's right for you. And we're all going to be slightly different, and that's what makes us wonderful. We're flawed.
I'm not letting you get away with that. You got to tell us. This is a F-bomb safe podcast. It's happened plenty of times. Give us your.
Well, I would say fuck the woulds, the coulds, and the shoulds. That's 100% huge. Like if you are constantly thinking about the shoulds, what you should be like, what you could be doing, what you would be doing if, you're going to destroy yourself. That's it. You've survived 100% of your hardest days just by being you. Oh, in theory, you should be able to just stay that path. And really belonging, like we said, is being part of something without sacrificing who you are. So I'm sad for that executive that was in that back room, and they probably needed it, like you said, more than anyone.
So another thing we're all dealing with, including in our executive and leadership teams, is that nobody's in the same room anymore. Right? So I'm curious, what would be like a primary lever that you would pull if you could wave a magic wand and there's an executive team working remotely? What would you magically insert into that environment that would increase their levels of belonging?
I love that question. I don't think I've ever been asked that one. I would tell them to schedule time just to talk with one another. That's what I would do. In a lot of my research, when I asked executives or leaders of multiple levels, I actually divided them up between new leaders and tenured leaders. The new leaders had a lot of zest for wanting to work with one another, wanting to learn from one another. The tenured leaders just thought it was mission impossible. They said, I only contact my coworkers when I need something. It's never just to be. So if I were going to say, how do you bring that sense of belonging? You start to learn more about each other. You start to know who one another is beyond your C title or
Hmm.
whatever you may have. I mean, it's very rare nowadays for any executive just to have one singular focus, right? And so, not only if you're the type of person that says, I don't want to bring emotions to the workplace, I'm sorry, but
They're
it
there
happens.
anyways.
And you are going to learn. Yeah, it happens. Exactly. And so the thing is, you're going to learn from one another. So if you need to tell yourself that to schedule time with someone to get to know them, go for it. But just do it. Because the more you know about one another, the more care comes into the mix, the more learning becomes bi-directional. And then I would
How
go
do
from there.
you navigate that on a spectrum of actual vulnerability, which is probably where the healthy belonging happens, and then just pure disclosure, where it's just like unnecessary sharing of things that nobody needed to know or hear, right? Like, how do you have the right boundaries and strike that balance?
You set the boundaries for yourself. This is what I'm not comfortable talking about because I won't feel good about myself after. Now, that doesn't mean that you are hiding or covering parts of yourself unless you're like, no one can know this. And there's a really sound reason. I'll be vulnerable and I'll tell you, for me, a lot of that had to do with my older son, who's a cancer survivor. And I hid that for a really long time in the workplace because I wanted one place where no one was looking at me with sad eyes. And I just wanted a place of escape. The more and more that I hid that, though, the more it became something I had to do. I should hide it, right? I could tell them, but then, so for me, I've stopped doing that because I need to be vulnerable because that's a really important part of who I am. And if it bothers anyone else, then that really says more about them than it says about me. And I think that's how you become vulnerable as an executive is you start to embrace what makes you unique and what you care about. Because I promise you, you're not alone. There's going to be people out there. For me, when I tell people, I would say I would maybe 3 out of 10, unfortunately, relate
Hmm.
to it. I say unfortunately
Of
because no one
course.
wants to be in that club. That's really important is that we embrace what makes us us. Because if not, we're just covering it. And no one's that good. No one's that good a faker, and nor should
Now,
they
we
have to be.
surely have some skeptics who are tuned in right now
Yes,
who wonder,
sure.
how does any of this relate to me? I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't see any value in sharing parts of me with people that I work with. And, when I have, maybe it's because I have plenty of belonging at home or with my community or whatever else.
Sure.
How does that differ? How does that conversation be structured? How do they seek belonging in the workplace when they're skeptical like that?
I think it really comes into what you really have to look at is what are your values? What's important to you? And if you are excluding them in the workplace, then that's something to really think about. If you are including them in the way you need to feel productive as a human, I think that's fine. It might not be a popular opinion because, yes, we want everyone to be vulnerable, but it also has to be where they're comfortable, right? You don't want to experience shame and certainly don't want stigma based on it. And that's why a lot of people don't share their vulnerability because they're worried, right? For me, at one point of life, I could have been nervous that people would label me the cancer mom, right? Now I'm like, great, let them label me the cancer mom. What negative impacts could that have on me? And I think that for me, what I would say is I always hash out the maybes or what ifs. If I tell them this, what would happen? And you really want to go into an exhaustive list with yourself because I promise you it's never as bad as you think initially. So I would say if you're out there and you're worried about your own vulnerability being a weakness, you want to really compare that against your values. I think you're going to find that that's not the case. There might be one small part that might be getting at you, and that's where your boundaries
Yeah,
come
and I
into
think
place.
values could even be the topic of connection, right? Like, you don't have to disclose your personal
Yeah.
life to connect with someone else, to be vulnerable. All right, you could tee up questions like, what are your own personal core values? Like, what do you think of our company's core values? Which ones are great? Which ones are bullshit and we need to change them? Like, how do we lean into these
Yes.
values? How do we support each other with these core values? And now you haven't actually talked about anything personal in terms of like your life logistics,
Right.
but you have talked about who you are at your core and as a person.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. One of my favorite things to do at work is when I'm with someone that's new on my team, I like to ask what they value. And what surprises them is I do it from a place of genuine interest, but I always wind up working it into their jobs. Because let's be honest, sometimes the job gets boring. You need things to lighten it up. I love games. I'm a gamer, by the way. So for me, if I know that Jason loves adventure, I'm going to figure out a way to put adventure into Jason's job. So it's meeting Jason where he is at, and he's happier. And as a leader, you should coach and grow people. That's your job. So I think this is no different. In fact, in the book, there's a lot about values, your values, because obviously that's really a key component of belonging, making sure that you're not sacrificing what's important to you. And then there's a lot of what happens when the values are misaligned. What happens if you find that your values are either not upheld or they clash? And a lot of people think, wait, they clash? What, huh? Why would you work for a place whose values clash? And it's not always the clash that people are thinking. It's not always the opposite, right? Or the antonyms of your values. It's really around how you live them in a company. So a lot of companies will put things in their values, but they're aspirational. And the big disconnect comes into play when the employees see them
Yeah.
not living their values. And I'm not talking about an executive in particular. I'm talking about the company living its values. So that misalignment brings us at an impasse most of the time. And that's another reason why people
Yeah,
leave their
and those
companies.
can be quirky and difficult too. At Champion, our number one core value was people matter much. And that came after 35 years of the company existing with no core values whatsoever and frankly treating people like garbage. And so when we put that front and center in every meeting and every company-wide AHOD and everything, we were like, people matter much. There were a lot of folks that were like, no, you don't believe that, right? They were looking at the previous track record. And then even as we started implementing new strategies, it wasn't enough. Or maybe it was being done in a way that didn't necessarily align with how they would have done it. And so, you can't please everyone, but I think that the heart behind it, the intent behind it was met with actual fervor and effort. And ultimately, it's one of the things that turned our company around and led us from 800 to 2,500 employees over the next 7 years. It was huge.
Wow.
We're just treating people like humans. Who would have thunk?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who would have? That's a crazy idea.
So I
No
assume
way.
all of these insights and more are in the book. And
They are all.
the book launched on March 4th, correct? Now
It
listeners don't
did,
know this,
yes.
but it's like a week before Christmas, actually, the year before this book launches. But that's how shows work. You record one time, you release it another. So it's really weird to say that something happened in the past that's not here yet. But anyways, the book is out, Braving the
Right.
Workplace. How do they find it? How do they engage with you? Those are the two big questions I have.
So you can find it on Amazon by just typing in Braving the Workplace book. I'm sure you'll get lots of Brene Brown pop-ups because that's such a compliment. I'll take it. And you also can engage with me many different platforms. I have a newsletter on LinkedIn called Belonging at Work. I have Beth at drbethkaplan.com. You can go to the site. There's so many different ways to do it. I actually love to see when people are commenting in the community. That's really exciting. Really sharing some of the issues and the difficulties. I think people get really surprised when we see the C-suite in those conversations. And it's not surprising to me. It's more endearing. It means that they're willing to learn. And
Yeah.
that's really exciting.
That's great. I assume the book is your shameless plug. We give every guest the opportunity to, you don't have some other thing. It's Braving the Workplace. Go look it up, buy it, read it, review it. Authors need reviews, not just reads. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Please review.
All right.
That's right.
Yeah, honest reviews. Quick tidbit. I could just share this with you, but I'll share it with the whole audience because I think it's a brilliant idea for anyone else doing something like what you're doing. I went to a book launch for a buddy of mine a couple months back, and he followed it with an email that had a custom GPT, like a chat GPT that he trained, and it was like, review the book GPT. So it had all these prompts, and then it would help you write a review, even if you had only kind of skimmed the book a little bit. So I thought that was a really creative way because people are like, oh, I want to try that. And now it's like, well, I have a review. I might as well post it. So yeah, there you go.
I love that. And there's also, just to let you know, there is a belonging chat GPT you can always type in. And that's right. So you can always, that's another way you can find, you can't really find me, but you can find my work.
That's awesome.
You can interact with the work, you can take it, you can say, you can plug in your problems. If you're a leader out there that says, we've done X, Y, and Z and it's not working, can you tell me why against Dr. Beth Kaplan's research? Like, so that's exciting that people are able to use that and really reset their own definitions to help them figure it out. So you're not alone.
Is that already out, or is that going to be out when the book's out? How do we find that on GPT?
That's out. You go to ChatGPT and you look for the different channels. You can type in belonging and you will get something that pops up saying that it's based on my work.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Here we are at the end. So we're going to end with the quick fire. So it's a this or that. I'll say two things and you just tell me which one. You said you're a gamer, so we'll start easy.
Oh, fun.
Board games or video games? Okay.
Board games.
Pancakes or waffles?
Pancakes.
If you took a vacation today, would you go to Europe or the Caribbean?
Europe.
All right. Night owl or morning person?
Both.
All right.
I'm always,
morning person.
Morning person. I'm more decisive than that.
All right.
We'll say morning person.
And then last one, when it comes to reading a book, do you want the hard copy or are you going audiobook? Okay.
Hard copy.
Excellent.
Always.
Are you going to have an audiobook version of Braving the Workplace? Excellent.
I am.
And that's out too.
Yes.
In the future,
that's
past.
Right. Not yet. Yeah.
Very,
Soon.
very cool.
Promise.
Oh gosh,
right.
Dr. Beth Kaplan, you have been a fantastic guest. It's nice, kind of similar topic, talking about culture and people, but shifting a little bit from the angle that we're coming at it from, a researcher and an author. And I'll very much appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate being one of your guests.
Awesome. Well, y'all go read the book, engage with Beth, and this has been excellent. We're glad that you joined us. You've been listening to or watching the Work Culture podcast, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.